She thinks she's in control. She thinks she's the one choosing. But what she doesn't know is that you've already planted the idea of you deep inside her mind, without saying a word, without making a move. That's the art of real seduction. Not the flashy lines, not the forced confidence, but the silent psychological games that bypass her defenses and make her feel something she can't explain. In this video, I'm going to hand you 5 seductive mind games that you won't find in books, forums, or even the dark corners of the internet. These are games designed to flip the emotional script, to make her obsessed, invested, and completely unaware that she's already falling. And once you know how to use them, you'll stop chasing because she'll start chasing you. Let's begin. Most men approach seduction like a transaction. They offer attention, compliments, validation, hoping to get affection in return. But when you operate at a higher level, you realize something most never do. Attraction isn't about what you give a woman. It's about what you trigger inside her. Emotions, doubts, anticipation. You don't need to speak more. You need to say less, but with surgical precision. That's where these mind games come in. They're not manipulative tricks. They're psychological frames, subtle shifts that place you in a position of quiet power, while her mind starts doing all the work. The first shift begins with one simple idea: withholding clarity. Most guys want to be clear, direct, easy to read. They want her to know they're interested, hoping that will win her over. But clarity is closure, and closure kills curiosity. What if instead you became strategically vague? Not cold, not indifferent, but just uncertain enough that she can't quite put you in a box. One day you're flirtatious, the next, reserved. You're fully present in conversation, but when she asks herself, "Does he like me?" she doesn't have a clear answer. That's where her imagination starts spiraling. And once she's imagining, she's investing. Because here's what most guys forget: a woman's imagination is 10 times more powerful than your best line. If she has to wonder, replay moments, decode your behavior, she's engaging emotionally, and engagement is attraction. Let her try to solve you. Let her search for clues. You're not being distant, you're becoming a puzzle she wants to figure out. And if there's one thing every psychologically attuned seducer knows, it's this: once a woman starts analyzing you, she's already emotionally involved. Now let's take it deeper. Another layer of this is mirroring emotional inconsistency. Let me explain. When a woman is used to being pursued, she's used to the pattern being predictable. Text leads to compliment. Compliment leads to escalation. Escalation leads to more validation. What happens when you break that pattern? When you respond not with neediness, but with calibrated unpredictability. She texts you a flirty message, and instead of matching her energy, you shift tone. You respond playfully, but with a twist. She says something teasing, and instead of chasing the flirt, you switch to a deeper, more grounded subject. That emotional turn, done deliberately, forces her to recalibrate. It disrupts the flow in a way that says, "I'm not here to perform, I'm real, you'll have to meet me." Psychologist Robert Greene once said, "Power is the ability to not rush." And in seduction, power is the ability to resist the impulse to always entertain. When you slow things down, when you create moments of silence, when you don't immediately mirror her tone, you reveal a deeper level of control. She begins to feel like she's adjusting to you. And that, right there, is the shift. Let's go further. There's a concept I call suggestive withdrawal. It's the opposite of neediness. It's not pulling away as a tactic. It's pulling back just enough to let her notice the emotional absence. Think of it like this: you build momentum, great conversation, subtle chemistry, tension. Then, just when she expects more, you slow down. You let a message sit unread. You respond the next day, not coldly, but from a calm, centered place. The key here is that your withdrawal must come after connection, not before. If you disappear too early, there's nothing for her to miss. But if you've already sparked her interest, your absence creates an emotional vacuum. And nature hates a vacuum. She starts wondering, did I say something wrong? Is he seeing someone else? Why hasn't he followed up? You see, most men are afraid to be forgotten, so they overcommunicate. But the seductive man understands. Being temporarily forgotten is part of the game. Because when you reappear, when you re-engage after that pause, the emotional spike is twice as high. The unpredictability becomes intoxicating. She never quite knows where she stands. And the moment she starts craving certainty, you've already won. Now, there's something deeper, something that makes this entire framework work like magic. And it's this: emotional grounding. You can't play any of these games if you're secretly anxious, if you're attached to the outcome, if you're doing it from insecurity. She will feel it. Women are experts at emotional congruence. They don't need logic. They read your energy, your tone, your pauses. If your detachment is fake, she'll know. But if you're genuinely grounded, centered in yourself, unbothered by her reactions, that's where the real seduction begins. You're not just different because you say clever things. You're different because you radiate a calm, unapologetic presence. You don't over-explain. You don't qualify yourself. You let her emotions rise and fall without trying to fix or control them. That level of containment is what creates polarity. She feels safe in your confidence, but also slightly off balance in your unpredictability. And that contrast is what keeps you on her mind. Let me give you a real-world example. There was a man I knew. Let's call him Daniel. Not a model, not a millionaire. But he had a way of walking into a room that made people pause. He didn't speak much, but when he did, women leaned in. One night, a woman approached him. Beautiful, articulate, used to being the center of male attention. They spoke for 5 minutes. He smiled once, maybe twice. Then, just as things were warming up, he said, "Nice meeting you," and walked away. She stood there stunned. 2 days later, she found his Instagram and messaged him. He replied the next morning, calm, short, yet magnetic. They talked, they met. She told him later, "I couldn't stop thinking about why you left." That was the hook. The lack of pursuit became the seed of her obsession, because her mind had to fill in the blanks. That's seductive psychology at work. And here's what you need to know. You can become that man, not by copying lines, not by pretending to be aloof, but by learning how to play under the surface, to speak to her subconscious, not her logic. And that begins when you stop trying to prove yourself and start letting her imagination do the heavy lifting. Let's go deeper into what truly makes these mind games so powerful. Because once you understand the emotional mechanics behind them, you stop seeing them as tricks and start using them like tools. Tools that don't just attract, but bind her attention without effort. There's a concept that's rarely talked about in the world of seduction, and yet it's one of the most potent forces you can trigger inside a woman. Emotional dissonance. Not confusion, not chaos, but a subtle emotional contradiction that creates internal friction. Here's how it works. You give her an experience that touches two opposite emotional poles, safety and danger. Not physical danger, obviously, but emotional risk. She feels your stability, your masculine containment, and yet, at the same time, she feels like she doesn't quite have you. That contrast is addictive. It mirrors the tension of a good novel, when you want to know what happens next, but you're not given the full picture. She feels drawn in by your groundedness. She senses that you're not like the others. But just when she thinks she can predict you, you shift. You become slightly colder, more distant, less available. And then, when she begins to recalibrate, when she starts adjusting her emotional investment, you return with warmth and presence. That swing between emotional states, stability, and mystery is the hook. It bypasses logic and attaches to her nervous system. This is the emotional version of what behavioral psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines addictive. The brain becomes obsessed not because the reward is constant, but because it's unpredictable. You reward her attention inconsistently. You're not robotic. You don't always respond right away. You don't always flirt. Sometimes you're reflective. Sometimes you're playful. Sometimes you're distant, but always you're authentic. She begins to associate you not with boredom or predictability, but with emotional motion, like a storm that pulls her in without explanation. This brings us to one of the most advanced seductive dynamics you can master: emotional pacing. Most men rush, they escalate too quickly. Compliments, confessions, physical moves, too much, too fast. Why? Because they're afraid of losing the moment. But a man who understands pacing knows this: tension builds value. The slower you unfold, the more emotionally expensive you become. Imagine you're in conversation with her, and the chemistry is there. Instead of rushing to say, "I like you," or Let's go out sometime. You hold back. You look at her. You pause. You shift the topic. Not because you're scared, but because you're in control of the tempo. She begins to feel like she's chasing the next moment, like she has to earn your next level of interest. This flips the power dynamic completely. And if you're wondering how this connects to those mind games I mentioned, it's simple. You're not seducing her with words, you're seducing her with rhythm. Like a piece of music, your presence rises and falls. There are high notes, flirtation, humor, mystery, and low notes, pauses, silences, unexpected changes of tone. Most men live on one frequency, always upbeat, always trying. That's noise. But you're a melody, and melodies are remembered. Let me give you another tool that most men never even think to use: controlled vulnerability. No, I'm not talking about dumping your feelings or trying to connect emotionally the way modern dating advice tells you. I'm talking about giving her a glimpse, just a glimpse of something real beneath the surface. A scar, a belief, a contradiction. Something that shows you're not just the confident guy who flirts well, but a man who's lived, who's suffered, who's felt. Here's how it works in practice. During a conversation, when she least expects it, maybe after a moment of laughter or flirtation, you drop something subtle. You know, it's funny. People always think I'm really calm, but they don't see the part of me that overthinks everything when I'm alone. You don't expand on it. You let it sit. You move on. What that does is open a window. It tells her, this man has depth. This man is layered. And the more layered you seem, the more she wants to uncover you. Because the greatest seducers weren't perfect. They were real. They had emotional weight. Mystery isn't about being unreadable. It's about being partially revealed. Just enough to spark her curiosity. Just enough to make her want to know more. Another concept that few men even realize they can use is something I call reverse psychological framing. Instead of trying to convince her you're desirable, you plant the idea that you're selective, that you don't always feel chemistry, that attraction for you isn't based on looks alone. This does two things. First, it disarms her. She's used to being the prize. She's used to men proving themselves. But now, she's wondering if she qualifies for you. Second, it elevates your perceived value. Because value isn't what you claim. It's what you filter. When you tell her in a low-key, nonchalant tone something like, I actually find it hard to connect with most people. Most conversations feel kind of surface level. What you're doing is reframing attraction. You're implying that even if she's attractive, you might not feel it, unless there's depth. And that's where the mind game starts. Now she's not thinking, do I like this guy? She's thinking, does he feel that with me? That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. We're talking about deep-level influence, not manipulation. Influence. Influence that comes from understanding the emotional software running in the background of every interaction. Influence that speaks to her subconscious. Influence that says, this man isn't just attractive, he's different. And trust me, when a woman feels that, she doesn't move on. She lingers. She obsesses. She replays moments in her mind, wondering what she did right or wrong. And all you did was play a few invisible notes she wasn't even aware she could hear. Let's take things to an even more subtle level. Because once you start playing in this space, where you're not chasing, not over-investing, not trying to impress, you begin to notice something fascinating. Women lean in, not just physically, but emotionally. And it's not because you're doing more, it's because you're doing less, with more intention. That's where real seductive power lives, in precision. One of the most underused yet dangerously effective tools in this kind of psychological seduction is what I call emotional time distortion. See, most guys operate in linear time. Meet a woman, show interest, escalate, get a result, step by step. But attraction doesn't move linearly. It moves in spikes, in echoes, in loops. What happens if, instead of trying to move forward constantly, you create moments that stay in her emotional memory long after you're gone? You do this by being emotionally memorable. And not through grand gestures, but through unexpected contrasts. For example, you're in a deep, slightly flirtatious conversation. You pause, lower your voice slightly, and say something reflective. Something about how you once trusted someone who let you down, or how silence sometimes says more than words. Then you shift, change the topic, smile, and move on as if nothing happened. What you've done is dropped an anchor, an emotional hook that lingers. That night, when she's alone, that's the moment she remembers. Not the compliment, not the joke, but that flicker of emotional weight behind your eyes, that vanished as quickly as it appeared. This technique works because women don't fall for your resume. They fall for your emotional imprint. And the man who leaves the strongest imprint is never the one who overexposes himself. He's the one who makes her feel something she didn't expect to feel, and then gives her no resolution, no closure. That lack of closure becomes a loop her mind wants to finish. That's time distortion. You're not there anymore, but she's still feeling you. Let's explore another subtle weapon: selective attention. Now pay attention. This one is pure gold. Most men flood women with attention, thinking it will earn them favor. But it has the opposite effect. It devalues your attention. Why? Because it's predictable. It's constant. It's easy. Selective attention is the ability to withdraw focus in the moment without disconnecting. Imagine you're on a date. She's telling a story. Instead of being wide-eyed and overly impressed, you smile slightly, lean back, and let a pause enter the space. You don't fill it with a compliment. You let her feel the silence. And then you shift the energy. That's interesting. But tell me something. What's something about you most people would never guess? Now she's off balance. She's recalibrating. She's realizing that your attention isn't automatic. It's earned. You don't give it freely. You're not rude. You're not arrogant. You're discerning. And in that moment, she feels the burn of your attention disappearing. That right there makes her crave it more. Selective attention isn't about being distant. It's about making her work to stay in your focus. That's what triggers value. Not your compliments, your discernment. And don't forget, this works in reverse too. When you give attention after withholding it, its impact is 10 times stronger. A simple, well-timed compliment from a man who is usually composed and reserved can short-circuit her nervous system. Why? Because it's rare. Because it's earned. And because it's wrapped in tension. She doesn't know when it's coming. She doesn't know why it's coming. And that uncertainty makes it addictive. Now let's talk about controlled contradiction. This is where you really start to mess with her internal framework in a good way. You become a man of paradox. One moment, you're deeply present. The next, you're distracted. You're kind, but unapologetically direct. You listen, but don't always agree. You're flirtatious, but not available. What this does is disrupt her schema of what an attractive man should act like. And when you break her patterns of expectation, she starts seeing you as something outside her experience. This is what causes fixation, obsession, because now she's not just attracted, she's confused. Her emotional system is triggered by a man she can't predict. And the female brain is biologically wired to pay more attention to unpredictability than to comfort. It's about survival. It's about decoding threats and rewards. You've become both. Not because you're playing games, but because you've learned to contain both sides of your personality without apology. This is something Casanova mastered centuries ago. In his memoirs, he often describes being both passionate and indifferent. He would write poetry to a woman, then vanish for a week. He would compliment her intelligence, then challenge her views. Women followed him not because he gave them what they wanted, but because he gave them what they didn't know they wanted. Here's something even darker and more advanced. It's called anticipatory guilt. You use this not with words, but with energy. It happens when you connect with a woman deeply, show her presence, interest, and subtle affection, and then pull back slowly, not abruptly. You just let the communication taper. Let her reach out. Let her feel the gap. She starts wondering, did I do something wrong? Did I misread the vibe? That emotional uncertainty creates a feeling of guilt, not because you punished her, but because you withdrew in a way that made her question herself. That feeling makes her want to fix it, to re-engage, to seek resolution. But the trick is, you never gave her a clear narrative in the first place. You were simply there, then you weren't. That void becomes a mirror. She starts reflecting on her actions, on her energy, on whether she missed a signal. And the moment she starts doubting herself, you're no longer the one seeking. She is. Now again, none of this works if your foundation is weak. If you're playing from a place of insecurity, you'll come off as manipulative, inconsistent, or worse, unstable. But when you're grounded, emotionally clean, and fully present in your masculine core, these dynamics become second nature. You don't chase, you don't explain, you allow. You allow her emotions to rise and fall. You allow mystery to build. You allow the tension to sit in the air without breaking it. Because here's the truth, the more you allow, the more she feels. And in a world where most men try to force feelings through constant effort, the man who can simply create space becomes unforgettable. And now you know. You've just stepped into a world of seduction most men will never even glimpse, because they're too busy memorizing lines, trying too hard to impress, or thinking attraction is something you earn by being nice and consistent. But you're starting to play on a different frequency now. You're not chasing, you're not convincing, you're letting her feel. And that's something she can't resist, no matter how much logic she throws at it. You're now equipped with weapons most people don't even know exist. Emotional time distortion, selective attention, controlled contradiction, anticipatory guilt. These are not games for children. These are psychological tools for men who want to be unforgettable, not because they were loud, flashy, or overconfident, but because they were felt in the deepest part of a woman's emotional body. And that's what real seduction is. It's not what she sees, it's what she feels in silence, when you're no longer there. That moment she stares at her phone, wondering why your name feels different from everyone else's. That moment she plays back a 2-second glance you gave her as if it were a full conversation. That's the level we're playing at now. But listen closely. This is just the beginning. There's a whole universe inside her psychology waiting to be explored. And if you want me to take you further, into the darker, more advanced layers of feminine desire, emotional imprinting, or subconscious attraction, I will. But only if you're ready to let go of the old ways and step into this new game with discipline, strategy, and power. So here's what I want you to do. If you felt this video hit a different nerve, if it gave you insights no one else is talking about, if it made you think differently, feel differently, or see yourself with a new level of clarity, then drop a comment below. Tell me which idea shifted your mindset. Hit the like button so we can reach more men who are ready to wake up from the noise. Share this video with someone who needs to stop chasing and start being chased. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, because this channel is not about gimmicks, it's about power, strategy, mastery. And trust me, the next video is going to hit even harder. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and remember, the most seductive thing you can ever do is nothing at exactly the right moment.